Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. Tonight I have a report of a terrifying creature in the Wanstead Park area of London. Now, many avid cryptozoologists will already know of the other creature reports that have happened and were reported in the area. They're very well documented. But the one I'm sharing with you tonight is a new report that came into BBR very recently. BBR investigator Steve White went out to the area using the map coordinates that were supplied by our witness Ian James. I spoke with Ian myself and he shared as many details of the events of that night that he could remember. I've added a link to Ian's photography website as the images he takes have a magical feel to them. So let's go back in time to 1989 when four ordinary lads were night fishing and they saw an impossible creature that stalked them through the night until the early morning. The Wanstead Park creature. Hi Debbie, I've just stumbled upon the BBR website and your contact details. During some research into a strange sighting that I had as an 18-year-old back in 1989 in Wanstead Park, London, I was in a conversation with a friend, an accompanying witness, and we were reminiscing about the old days, and the subject of this sighting came up. My friend and I both agreed that it's something that not only we will never forget, but something that we both think about regularly to this day. As I say, this happened in Wanstead Park. I was in my late teens. I don't know the exact date, but it would have been in 1989. At the time, I'd been out earlier in the evening playing squash for a few hours at Barking Sports Centre with a few mates. We were into keeping fit and on a health kick, so even though none of us drank any alcohol after we played squash that night, we went to our local pub, the Duke's Head, for a bit. Not wanting to cut the night short, as it was a Friday night, we decided to go night fishing on one of the ornamental lakes in Wanstead Park. I went home about 9 p.m. to get my tackle, and I asked my dad if I could borrow his good torch. He wasn't keen on me taking it, and he warned me not to run the battery out, but in the end he said I could. So we went up there in Paul's car, which was a souped-up Mark II Escort. We went to the area we call the back car park, and that's the one just off Overton Drive, E11. And that road is the one close to the golf course. Wanstead Park is similar to most town parks in the UK. It used to be the grounds of a huge mansion known as Wanstead House, and that was built in the 18th century. But there'd been a manor house on that spot that dates back to the 14th century. The house is gone now, as it was sold off to pay the debts in 1924 of the family. But some of the grounds and the way they were laid out still remain. The gateposts of the house remain, and there is a meadow that sweeps down to the ornamental lakes known as the Glade. That was at the front of where the house sat. We walked around the ornamental lakes until we got to the tree line. We went down into the underbrush, about 300 metres from an old derelict boathouse folly known as the Grotto. We got the rod set up and we just sat around telling jokes as the fish weren't biting and we were all getting a bit bored. It was in the early hours of the morning by this time, and we just decided to go off on a mooch and wander around the park and the lakes. We were walking on the gravel path, which was about 10 to 15 feet wide back then. It looks smaller now on Google Earth. The path came to a fork that would take us back to where we'd been fishing. There were four of us. I was on the left-hand side with my torch. Paul and Neil were in the middle with no torches, and then my other mate, also called Paul, was on the right-hand side with his torch. As we reached the apex of the fork, I was just swinging my torch along when it lit up these two eyes. They were big eyes, not like a fox or a cat. They were bigger than a human eye. I lived in Sweden for a number of years in the north, and we lived up on one of the mountains, and you would sometimes see eye shine from moose caught in our headlights, and these eyes were like that. They were not 6 or 7 feet off the ground. They were more like 3.5, 4 feet off the ground. We were still walking towards it, and we got as close as about 30 feet away from wherever it was. What I'm going to explain next all happened simultaneously. I still had my torch shining on it, and Paul did the same. We got a really good look at it with both torch beams on it, and it was hiding in the bushes. It was just standing there looking at us. And as I said, "What the fuck is that?" my other two friends ran at it. They shouted, "Get it!" But as soon as they'd taken 2 strides towards this thing, you could see it more clearly. Standing there is what I would describe as a primate of some kind. You could see its eyes, and the fur around them was really dark. But in the torchlight, it had a red tinge like an orangutan. If you see a cat and it's a black cat, its coat's all one colour. But as it walks into the light or the sunlight, there's almost a reddish colour to it. Well, it was like that. The way it was standing showed that its arms and torso were way longer than its legs. I don't know if it was its true height, or if it was hunched over or even kneeling down, because I couldn't see its feet. They were in the grass. Its whole body was covered in fur, and the length of the fur was similar to that of an orangutan. As I said, this all happened in a second. As my two mates ran towards it, pandemonium happened. At that point, this thing let out a cry, and it was a cross between a really throaty growl and a hiss. And it bared its teeth, and all I can remember is those canines. They were not close together like a dog's teeth. They were spaced further apart like a human's are. Its face was also flatter than a primate's. And at that point, my two mates who had run at it slipped onto the gravel and ended up on the floor. I grabbed Neil, and Paul grabbed Paul, and we all turned to run. We were all running back up this path, and it chased us. It didn't come out onto the path and chase us. It stayed within the bushes while it kept up with us. You could see the bushes moving as it went through there. It didn't make any other vocal sounds at this point. We just kept running down that path until we got to the perch pond. We kept running across the heath in the direction of the building known as the temple. And when we were about halfway across the heath, I told everyone to get down on the floor. It was terrifying. We were all upset, and Neil was sobbing. In fact, we were all almost sobbing. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. We had to turn the torches out and just lay there. We were there for at least an hour, and this thing never left. It didn't come out into the open again, but you could hear it moving around in the underbrush. Every now and then it would get a tree or a bush and just shake it violently. I would say it was a territorial show of strength. That's what it felt like to me. And then we realised we'd have to go back. We'd have to pass where it was to get back to the fishing gear and then the car. Both of those areas meant going back, but we didn't have a choice. There would have been hell to pay if I didn't bring the tackle box back and the rods, as some of my dad's gear was still in there too. I remember foraging around for a thick branch I could use to protect myself as we set off back to the fishing spot. I knew that was probably useless, but it made me feel a bit better knowing I had something to defend myself with. I don't know how we got back to the car. As soon as I got home, I woke up Mum and Dad and I told them what had happened. I was hyper by the time I got home. My adrenaline was running. I was shaking. My dad was having none of it, but my mum was more inclined to believe us. She asked my mates what happened and they confirmed it. We hung around in a crowd back then. Most of our mates thought we were, messing about or taking a piss. So a little over a week later, we put a plan together to go back out there and, a few of us. There's probably about 20 of us, and we set off for the park with the idea of hunting this thing down. It didn't matter how many of us there were, or what we carried with us. As soon as we got a few hundred yards into the park, our collective resolve cracked, and we legged it and went back to the car. I have puzzled about this event for years, and for all I've told some people, it isn't something I've shared a lot. Until recently, I didn't think anyone else here in the UK had seen something like it. But I thought I'd have a look on Google, and that led me to a few newspaper reports of a hairy creature in the area. And that's when I contacted you, Deb. I can't thank our witness Ian enough, or Steve, the BBR investigator who went out and filmed the area where the account happened. There is a longer account to this, and that will go out in the podcast, and I will further explain the other reports in the area. Wanstead Heath Green Corridor starts, I believe, the north of Epping Forest, and it follows the course of the River Lee. And I'll bring you reports from there that are quite similar and that have also involved boys fishing in a local pond. Until next time, good night, everyone.